Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme we'll be discussing the biggest political story this week, and that is the Cabinet Reshuffle. Out goes the Home Secretary Suella Braverman, and in comes our former Prime Minister David Cameron as our new Foreign Secretary, and we'll be asking, will this help Rishi Sunak win the next general election? And in this programme I'm joined by my all-star cast, which is Maureen Martin, who's President of the Christian People's Alliance, together with Robert Harris from Voice for Justice UK. So welcome to the programme. Maureen, it's great to see you. Do you want to give us a bit of an update on the work and the ministry of the Christian People's Alliance as you are preparing for a general election, but also preparing, I think, in your opinion, more importantly, for the London Assembly elections next May?
Yeah, thank you. Great to be back, Simon. Yes, we are gearing up for the general election. It's going to be next year at some point. But they say October, but we know it's going to be by the end of 2024. But what we're really excited about is the mayoral London Assembly elections next year. Unlike the general election, unlike the mayoral elections, the London Assembly elections are proportional representation. Therefore, any party that puts up a party list only needs 5% of the vote. So we are quite excited. This gives smaller parties like the CPA an opportunity to get a member elected to the London Assembly. So we are reaching out to our base, which is the church, of course, to see if we can get that block vote and get somebody elected to the London Assembly. Hopefully me. Yeah,
because you're first on the list.
Yes, I'll be first on the list.
Once you do get elected to the London Assembly, yeah, Maureen, I still want you back on the programme.
Absolutely,
okay?
Absolutely.
So remember your roots, okay?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And it's great to see you on the programme as well, Robert. You do a great job for Voice for Justice UK. Do you want to give us an update on this really vital work that you are now preparing in getting testimonies where Christians have been discriminated and marginalised in the workplace?
Thank you for having me back on the programme, Simon.
That's good.
Voice for Justice has commissioned an inquiry which will be investigating discrimination against Christians in the UK when it's experienced on account of their faith. And we already have people lined up who will be giving testimony. Many of them, it will be public testimony, so the public will be able to sit in on those sessions over Zoom. We have a lady called Isabel von Spruce, whose case has been reported all over the world. She silently prayed outside an abortion clinic on a few occasions, and she was arrested on 2 occasions. So we're going to hear from her and a number of other cases. Some will be known already to the general public, others we haven't heard about their cases previously. But we will be assessing the nature, context and scale of discrimination. Anyone listening who might want to be an observer during these hearings, visit our website, cdac.org.uk, cidac.org.uk.
Excellent. Can I just pick you up one point? So here we are, a woman who's praying outside an abortion clinic in her head, gets arrested, yet in the streets of London we have chants of jihad to overthrow the state, incitement to racial and violence on our streets, and no one's arrested.
The contrast couldn't be more starker. Absolutely. These questions are of great concern to many people. In terms of the cases that we're hearing, we're not making any assessment, obviously, before the hearings. That will be in due course when the reports are published. But certainly the contrast that you've given it poses many serious questions.
Absolutely. And Maureen, what are your thoughts on this surprising reshuffle by Rishi? I think it's his final cabinet before heading into a general election. Of course, I am a big fan of Suella Braverman. I think she actually gets the existential threat posed by mass illegal immigration. She also understands the danger and incitement of these mass Palestinian rallies that we're seeing dominating the streets of London and our capital cities in Scotland and in Wales, and also in Northern Ireland as well. I think she'll be a big loss for the Conservative Party. And then to bring back David Cameron, former Prime Minister, to the position of Foreign Secretary, I don't think anyone saw that one coming. Share with us your thoughts.
Well, indeed, Simon, it was a shot heard all around the world, I think. But judging by the speed at which this happened, it seemed like it was a bit of a planned thing, because David Cameron did not go through any vetting process. As I would think, normally a Lord had he's been appointed now, would need to go through some sort of a vetting process. In order to be a cabinet minister, you need to be either an MP or a Lord. These things happened simultaneously. He was made a Lord and then a cabinet minister immediately. So it seemed like it was a planned thing. So to me, it appears as though they were planning to get rid of Suella when they had an excuse to do so. And Suella presented them with an excuse, supposedly with this article. But it seems to me that the real reason why she's been fired, so to speak, is because she's been so outspoken about the way our organisations like the Met Police have been handling the situation and the lack of action to really police these demonstrations properly. Now, she's been outspoken on many things. This is why this is a loss for us as Christians and for the nation generally to see Suella go, because she has been a champion of traditional conservative values, which is what the Conservative Party should be about. And I think it's one of the reasons why she's been ousted, as it were, because the Conservative Party no longer is that party that Margaret Thatcher was the leader of. They're no longer really conservatives.
Yep, this is very true. And Robert, what do you make of the sacking of Braverman as Home Secretary, together with the appointment of David Cameron? And of course, you know, the media is so fickle, because when Theresa May was Prime Minister, first became Prime Minister after David Cameron resigned after the failed referendum on the EU, had to resign because the Remain lost that vote. Theresa May didn't have any political legitimacy. The media called for an immediate general election. She called a general election and just managed to hang on to power. The likes of Jeremy Corbyn came so close to becoming our Prime Minister. And again, we see when Boris took over the leadership of the Conservative Party, became Prime Minister, huge amounts of pressure placed on him to call for an election. And now there is no one in the media calling for Rishi to call a general election, because not even one member of Parliament, Conservative member of Parliament, voted for him in his contest when Liz Truss was forced to resign as she won the Conservative Party grassroots vote to become leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. And again, we see, as Maureen mentioned, that David Cameron has been appointed as Foreign Secretary when he wasn't a member of the House of Lords nor an MP, and hasn't gone through the proper vetting process. So there are big questions about his political legitimacy and that of Rishi Sunak, surely.
There are certainly questions of political legitimacy, but we have a thing called the unwritten constitution in this country, and we don't have strictly defined rules about how government works in all instances. I mean, think of Margaret Thatcher's first Foreign Secretary, Lord Carrington. He was not an elected member of the House of Commons. He was a hereditary peer, so he had to operate as Foreign Secretary in the other house. Gordon Brown, the other political party, it's not just Conservatives, Gordon Brown appointed Peter Mandelson as Business Secretary, I think it was 2008. He was not an elected member of the House of Commons at that point. He was made a peer, specially for that purpose. So there are precedents to this, and I think it's just the way we operate as a country. Unless we have a written constitution, and that's a whole different debate, we're going to expect this sort of conduct at the highest levels of power.
Yeah. And Maureen, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's very disappointing that Rishi has sacked Suella Braverman for her courage, her bravery, willing to speak out. The fact that her mother is a Bible-believing Christian, attends the prayer for Parliament sessions as well. You know, she was also married to her husband's Jewish as well, so she knows what the Jewish community is going through right now with this huge rise of Jew hatred we're seeing in our country. She understood the problem we face with mass illegal immigration, and her speech she made to the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. a few months ago was absolutely extraordinary. Completely gets it. Just share with us, in your opinion, what is her legacy? Because she did try and stop the big mass Palestinian protests taking place on Armistice Day last Saturday.
Indeed, I think Suella is such a great loss because she had her finger on the pulse of what the British people are really thinking and had the courage to actually say it and try to do something about it. With the Rwanda situation, for instance, that's going through the Supreme Court this week, I believe the decisions are going to come down this week, ironically. So she had a real good understanding where the British people were and articulated that on our behalf. Unfortunately, Rishi does not seem to have that same sort of intuitive understanding of the British people. Unfortunately for him, he's fired the one person that did have and was in position to do something about it. And she's trying to. She's been blocked by the administrative state. Hence, the Rwanda situation had to go to the Supreme Court. But she's trying to do something about it. This is her legacy. And she's very popular, not only within the Conservative Party, but also with popular opinion. She's very popular. And people recognise the fact that she was brave and courageous to speak truth. And now she's being punished for doing just that. So we'll see how things go. I don't think Suella's going to ride off into the sunset and disappear. She will return, as you know, as I said, she'll be back, as they say.
Robert, so we know that Suella Braverman was very much a maverick. She spoke her mind. She courted controversy. I mean, she didn't get authorization for the article that she wrote in the Times, so we can see that Rishi and Number 10 were kind of angry at the way that she will go off in different directions from the government on certain things, and the government's trying to restore a good relationship with the Met, and she can torpedo it. But clearly she has every right to do that. But do you think the Conservative Party will pay a political price for this come the election? Because we know that she was one of the champions of the Brexiteers within the Conservative Party. She's seen as centre-right within the party itself. So what impact do you think this could have on an election?
I think wherever one stands politically in this country, I think there's a wide acknowledgement that the Conservative Party is divided significantly on so many issues, whether it's Europe, traditional moral values, political correctness, equality issues. And I think this really brings out the question, well, yes, where is this, what does this have, what impact does this have on the future and the election? It's difficult to know because between now and the election, all sorts of things are going to happen. And of course, a government is judged by not just by its policies and its manifesto promises and whether they're implemented, but also how it responds to emergencies and unpredictable scenarios. And of course, what's going on in Israel and Gaza at the moment and Ukraine, we don't know where this is going to develop, how it's going to develop and evolve in the coming months. So I think it's still too early, it's still premature to know for sure how this is going to impact the election, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Maureen, obviously the big political news story this week is the surprise return of our former Prime Minister David Cameron to frontline politics to become our Foreign Minister. And he's become a Lord in order to enable him to carry out that role. What do you make of his appointment to Rishi's cabinet?
Well, we know that David Cameron is a massive globalist. I mean, that's not news to anyone. So it does beg the question, is this an attempt to kind of roll back Brexit? We have to ask that question because Rishi initially came out as a pro-Brexit Prime Minister. But is he showing his true colours here? Is David Cameron returning so he can cosy up again to the EU? Because we've heard Labour saying that we should, you know, get closer to the EU. Liberals are saying we need to get to the heart of Europe. So is Rishi bringing David back to make an attempt to undo Brexit? These are questions we have to ask. Because he's the Foreign Secretary, this means that he's going to be advocating for the UK on behalf or with our foreign allies. And Europe is still an ally, whether you like it or not. We still have to operate within Europe. We're part of, you know, the continent. So is he back for that reason? And we have to ask that question. And if that is the case, will this help Rishi in the long run? I don't think so. Because David Cameron, he's not necessarily a maverick, but is he going to really help Rishi in what he really wants to do is to be re-elected as a Prime Minister? Well, he wasn't really elected in the first place, but is he going to get the endorsement of the British public to be actually elected after the next general election? And this is an attempt to ensure that. I don't think it's going to work for Rishi.
Yep. And yeah, Robert, what are your thoughts on the former Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister David Cameron, who came to power in 2010, formed that coalition government with the Liberal Democrats, and of course he won the general election in 2015, had to resign in 2016 after calling for a referendum. He was part of the Remain side. They lost, so he felt he had no other option but to actually resign because he couldn't implement Brexit. Share with us his legacy as Prime Minister.
Huge question. I think, well, a few things come to mind. The big society, which we don't hear about anymore. It's just gone silent. It was a great idea, and I would argue it was an idea inspired by Christian values of seeing oneself as being part of a larger world, a community. We're not just isolated individuals catering to our own selfish needs. We're part of a community. I think that was a good, well-intentioned idea. The question is, what happened? How did that translate into actual policy? I think the only example that comes to mind in that regard is the implementation of the National Citizen Service. And I think while that was a good idea, it was very limited, and I think he could have gone a lot further in making it compulsory. I know that word is not a great word, but it's a way of getting young people integrated in society, to give them a sense that it's not just about my rights, it's about our responsibilities towards others, our duties towards others, service towards others. So I think that was a good idea, but it didn't go far enough. There are a number of other things, of course. The Scottish referendum, he technically could have said, no, we're not going to give Scotland the right to have that referendum. He was allowed to do that. I know it would have created something of a backlash, and that wasn't a great thing because it just further embedded, I would suggest, the divisions within Scotland among those who want to stay within the Union and those who want to leave. The Brexit referendum, of course, if it did one thing, it exposed the huge, harsh divisions within the country. And we haven't really completely healed from that, I don't think. I think there's still a climate of suspicion, even hatred sometimes on certain sides, which is not great. It's not nice. We haven't recovered from that. Then, of course, there's gay marriage. Gay marriage, David Cameron's own admission is that, he considers it one of his greatest achievements. And I think many of us in the country with more traditional perspectives on morality and family would say that this has really helped to significantly rebrand morality. And I think there's still a significant groundswell of opinion that would say this wasn't really necessary. It hasn't done anything significant for the country. And of course the LGBT community, well, they were not asking for this. There's also, this is not often spoken about these days, but we mustn't forget this. He was very strong on advocating for Sharia finance to be integrated into our country, so that he wanted the UK to be the leader, the global leader in Islamic finance in the non-Muslim world. Remember. Now that has all sorts of implications, and I would suggest probably the main implication, the main concern that I have and many other people would have, is that it's actually setting a precedent, it's setting up an infrastructure for two parallel economic systems. And of course that raises the question of Sharia courts. Can you have two legal systems working side by side in a democracy? The answer is no, you can't. It doesn't work. It's unworkable. You need to have a legal system and an economic system that works for everybody. Everybody's involved. We can't have a parallel system. Now, I bring that up because it could have an implication, his perspectives on that could have an implication on how he handles his foreign policy. And you may want to expand upon that in some of your other questions, I don't know. But so there's quite a lot of things. And also he did appoint a Minister of Faith, which was a first. Lady Baroness Varsi, who was his Minister of Faith. I have to say, I think it was him trying to be very modern and diverse. I think it was probably a token appointment. I'm not sure if he really believed in what he was doing. And in an interview, as Minister of Faith, she did say that unlike the Labour government under Tony Blair, when they said, "We don't do God," Alistair Campbell's famous phrase, "We don't do God," she said, "Well, we do God." But the question is, how did that translate into actual policy, into new outcomes for the country? I don't see any evidence that there were any real changes in the country. I mean, just very briefly, I remember Eric Pickles, as the Community Secretary, did rush through a law in Parliament that gave permission for local authorities to say prayers at the beginning of their meetings. Now, it wasn't compulsory. Well, you can't force people to do these things, but he gave them permission. So there were a few good things, but actually, overall, I think attitudes towards Christians, certainly, and the various challenges that are evolving in this modern society, I don't think there was any real hard policy and real meaningful shifts that took place. There's also foreign policy, but it's a big,
I think we also have to
here.
recognise that he did save our country from an absolute economic catastrophe after the banking crisis of 2007. And did bring about severe austerity in order to balance the books.
That's true.
And stabilise the economy with the help of the Liberal Democrats, and the Liberal Democrats have been paying the political price for that ever since. So I think that's important to mention. But Maureen, I mean, I've never known a time in my lifetime where we've seen a former Prime Minister come back to government and become a cabinet minister. Isn't there a kind of danger now that Rishi has, that you've got a former Prime Minister who led the country for 6 years, vastly experienced in the cabinet, will undermine Rishi's own authority in cabinet and his own position as government, knowing you've got someone who is far more experienced than he is at being Prime Minister?
Well, we hope not, for Rishi's sake. However, we hope the same thing does not happen to Rishi, which happened in the Bible to David and Absalom. We know what happened in that situation. Absalom left, but he was invited back into the court by David himself. And eventually, he caused David to flee from Jerusalem. He almost took the kingdom. So we hope that this does not happen to Rishi. And quite frankly, I'm not quite sure what David Cameron's aspirations are. We know he's a globalist. We know that he would like to bring us back into Europe. Now, does Rishi and David Cameron's aspirations, are they compatible? Why had Rishi brought him back? It could be the experience. It could be he was told to bring him back by his globalist overlords. I'm talking about Rishi here. So I suspect Rishi has been ordered to do this. I don't think it's something he probably wanted to do himself. I think he was told this is how it's going to be. You need to bring David back because we have another plan. So it depends on what David Cameron's aspirations are, what his assignment is being back in the cabinet. I suspect it's got more to do with the UK getting back on the globalist scene and getting cosy with Europe again. That's what I suspect. Now, does he have aspirations in terms of taking over the party leadership again? It's possible, but I don't actually think so. I think he's more working on getting Britain back onto the globalist scene so we can, be part of the big happy family again. So,
Yeah, some big happy family.
Yeah.
And Robert, I suppose the big question is, could we see the prospect of Keir Starmer winning the next general election and then appointing Tony Blair to become Foreign Secretary or even Home Secretary? Has this president now been set for former Prime Ministers to come back and serve in the highest echelons of government?
It's impossible to know the future, but I doubt whether he would probably appoint Blair, because Blair has got huge amounts of baggage with Iraq, and I don't think Keir Starmer would probably make that decision. I doubt it very much.
And also I have to ask you about David Cameron's foreign policy with about 4 minutes left to go. We know that he was Prime Minister during the disastrous misinterpretation of the Arab Spring, thinking that this was a democratic movement that was being birthed in North Africa and the Middle East, and yet what we saw is it brought tyranny through democracy to the ballot to the ballot papers and voting, and we saw the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood. We saw Libya in total chaos as they supported the rebel forces against Colonel Gaddafi. So, is he to be trusted when it comes to foreign policy? Got 3 minutes left.
Well, the two issues are Ukraine and Russia and Gaza and Israel. In the short time I've got, I'll just say this. I think his attitude towards Israel, he's made it very clear he's going to unequivocally stand with Israel. He said that in a tweet a few days after October the 7th. However, he does have a history as Prime Minister of being rather ambiguous over his public statements regarding Gaza and what happens in Gaza. He called it an open-air prison when he was in Turkey. And he didn't appear to really get to grips with the facts in public about how Hamas treats its own people. So I think at the end of the day, he's a pragmatist. He's not a conviction politician where you know he's going to say the right thing because he believes it to be true. However, he's going to be more pro-Israel than not. But I think he's difficult to say how people are going to perform when they're in office. But I think we've got clues to suggest that he is probably going to be more critical of Israel's actions on the international, from international legal perspective and so on, than perhaps we would like.
That's very, very helpful. And Maureen, how should Christians be praying at this time, particularly as we're told to pray for our governments, that we should have a peaceful life, as commanded by the Apostle Paul?
Yes. Always pray for wisdom. That's always the principal thing, as according to Proverbs 4:7. Because without God's wisdom, we know we always make the wrong decisions. Even more so for our politicians, because there's some pretty major principalities operating in government, and it influences their thinking, influences everything that happens. So we need to pray for wisdom initially, and decree and declare, according to Proverbs 29:2, that the righteous are in authority. We call the things that be not as though they were. So we need to make these declarations, and knowing that when we decree a thing, it shall be established. So this is how we should be praying for our government.
So Maureen and Robert, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's Politics. They've done a great job. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you at home. Obviously, the biggest news story of this week is the reshuffle, the sacking of our Home Secretary Suella Braverman, together with the reappointment of former Prime Minister David Cameron. Where will this lead? What impact will this have in the forthcoming general election? None of us know, but we have a duty as Christians to pray for those in authority above us, because authority is God-given. And therefore, if we want to live peaceful lives, we need to pray for our government. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.